Here we go. There we go.
So I think it's hard because teachers know what needs to be done and they even know how to do it. But then you actually get into a classroom and you realize there's so many other things. And then I think another thing that people don't understand on the parent side and on the teacher side is that the Individuals with Disability in Education Act is a grant statute. So that comes with stipulations that you have to follow. So the same things that give your kids rights are also what limit the school. So
Yeah.
it's just we're so behind in what we know and what we're capable of doing in a public school system.
And Brittany, I just watching the educational leaders that I've seen have to go through the IEP evaluations. These are the hardest things. You have to get everybody in the same room. You have to have your psychologists, you have to have your coaches, your teachers. Anytime your kids mainstream out, those teachers need to be there. The principal. There's so many people that have to be at these meetings. That's so overwhelming to a parent, number one. But two, it's all required. They have to give their feedback. They have to give their input, all that kind of stuff. And to me, I think we can simplify some of this stuff as well as all the IEPs that they have to write out. It's such a tedious process. Yet it's like every single detail for this child. We don't do that much for our typical students, and we're putting all of this into these kids. Instead, maybe there's ways like pull parent programs in and talk to the parents and say, what kind of things do we really need to make this successful for everybody involved, right? To make sure that people show up, because there's parents that will go in and they will rip those IEPs apart and they'll be like, no, we're not doing this. And it's like, oh my gosh, I just spent hours writing this thing and now, they need to change it because they know that at home, that's not going to work. So why would it work at school? But then, there's other parents that are like, well, no, I want my child to go to college. So we have to do this. And then some parents are like, listen, you're the experts, you guys do it. And then they just leave it up to you to do everything. So we have to find that balance, and we have to, and I address this because it's the elephant in the room. Like nobody's going to talk about, nobody's going to say these are the things that need to happen. And we are pro, first of all, we are pro education, period, but we're pro, the government education because your taxes are paying for this. So we
Right.
have to make that, great.
Yeah, that's an interesting point of view because I really love the IEP process when it's done right. But that's the key word, like when it's done right. And from experience, it is a lot of work. And a lot of times you're doing a lot of work for a lot of kids. So it's not done to the best of its ability. But to speak to what you said about the parents, I love the IEP team because all of those people have to be there because they interact with your child in a different way and their expertise is different. So what a psychologist knows, a speech therapist doesn't, an educator doesn't, but they all have a different point of view that kind of put that disability profile together. I think what the problem is that the parents aren't consulted until the end of that process. So if we just actually let parents be a credible part of the IEP team, because in my opinion, they're the subject matter expert, right? If we put them in it from the beginning and then created a plan, it would work much better. And then you mentioned at home, this doesn't work at home and that won't transfer over to school. That's a really tricky piece of it because educators have to address what's happening in school. And sometimes you see one child at school that self-regulates really well and then isn't regulated at home. And the school will say things like, well, they're doing great here, but the parent will say, obviously they're not because of what comes home. And legally, the school just has to address what they see.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky and flawed system.
Well, and I think that one of the things that concern me, I think with my child especially, is they said at a certain point the funding went away for speech therapy, and so Landon was pulled from that at a young age, and I was like, okay, yeah, I think he's doing great. I didn't know, and found out later, in his life that every time somebody asked him a question, he would look to my husband or myself to help him answer that question. So he wasn't independently speaking. He was
Mhm.
speaking, but it wasn't independent. Coping skills, not independent. So a lot of these kids, we don't even talk about coping skills. We don't talk about those things. And that's where the parent really could come in and say, these are the things that work at home that you might want to try when the child's having a behavior, or they're having a day where they're just having a meltdown, or things aren't going right. That's where the parent voice comes in. But sometimes I think the parents feel like, well, I don't have a voice, or I don't want to use my voice. I want these teachers, this is what they're getting paid to do, and we all have different, like, there's so many different perspectives out there. It's really hard to have a common way of doing this. And so what I hope is that for parent side of things, that we come together and we kind of say, okay, this would be a great way to address doing the IEPs as a parent perspective, so that I stay involved and that I have to use my voice. It's not a choice. You have to use your voice. It's just your child. And we all have to have the best interests of this child. And then with the teachers, you know, like you just said, how your child might be at school isn't how it is at home. But then when they come home, they're having meltdowns because they never stemmed at school, because they tried to hide that they have autism or whatever it may be. So there's so many aspects of this. And I think, we have a lot of checklists, but going through those checklists and just kind of making sure that, when it comes to education, or when it comes to socialization, or when it comes to, the everyday coping skills and all that kind of stuff, like, we address not just the curriculum piece of it, but some of those other behaviors that come along with it that may not be exhibiting at school, but they're exhibiting at home that affect school. Because when
Right.
Landon would come home, they would give him homework, and that triggered him. Like, the whole night we were stressed out. And I finally went to the teachers and I go, is there any way we can just take homework out of the equation? And the teacher's like, oh yeah, no problem. And I was like, oh my gosh, I should have answered like 6 years ago, because the stress and anxiety that goes along with it. Um, it's not that I don't want to do that, but the things that we work on are more life skills, safety skills, job skills, right? And then they go to education and they're learning all those components of it. And to be able to bridge those two gaps is so important. And I don't know, Brittany, if you know this, but our model is at-risk families. So not just autism, but at-risk families, right? Um, Education, community, and responders. And we put all of those people together. Like, our goal is to see where are the broken pieces, or where are the gaps, and then coming in and assessing that. And with your knowledge and your experience, just as a family member, but as well as a teacher, I mean, you have a lot to offer to really fix some of the things that need to be addressed.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The it's a reoccurring theme in the IEPs that I get brought into. A lot of times, by the time a family calls me, we are well down the road into a problem. But a lot of times with my families, they're especially especially my families with autistic children, they are caught up in this is my child at school, this is my child at home. And they're just stuck. And it's like the mom is less credible because she's saying things are happening that the school's not seeing. So instead of acknowledging that that could be a different problem or the same child, it's like, well, we don't see what you're talking about. And then the parent feels like they don't have any options, or they don't have a say because they're not being heard. When the simple answer is that any child, regardless of a disability, spends an extensive amount of time in a school day self-regulating, but not all children have enough spoons to do that. They don't have enough to get through their entire day. And we know that science tells us that. So why can't we just acknowledge it in a school setting? And I love that you guys are approaching the whole child, because something I really push to my families is developing a disability profile that talks about everything that goes into your child, their strengths, their weaknesses, how
Yeah.
each part of them impacts different areas, and communicating that forward, because they are a whole human, not a segmented human in different parts of the day.
Well, and Brittany, I think if the parents did that, and then let's say, and this is just a hypothetical, right? we go out to the community and we say, we would like our responders and our community to come in. We're going to do an educational forum to talk about individuals that have a disability. And we start training our community, we start training our officers, our firefighters, medics, how to address these individuals. As a teacher perspective, as a parent perspective, putting those two people in the room to tell these other individuals how to address these types of behaviors or socialization, whatever it may be. I feel like you're an expert when it comes to the educational side of it. You're also an expert as a parent. You know, for me, I've never been in a classroom, so I can't say that I understand what you deal with. I worked in a restaurant. I had, 30, 40 employees at one time. That was a classroom, and you were always training and educating. The difference is they were very independent and you had to reel them in. It was a little different, right? But when you started observing all your employees, you saw the ones that might have a disability. You saw the ones that, but they didn't want to show it or talk about it because they were around their peers and they were embarrassed about it or they weren't comfortable speaking about it. I think we have to open those doors. We have to fix those types of things. And I know with Dr. Khan being a part of this, she has brought in some of those components because she has autism herself. She's a doctorate of psychology. Oh my gosh, her list goes on, right? And she's global. She can speak 3 languages. She's willing to go out there and do this. She's in a country where they don't all have 100% rights with everything, and she has to fight for that sometimes. So she's doing so many, it's like breaking down so many walls, and we can learn so much from her. So Dr. Khan, you've been listening to us, and obviously Brittany and I have a lot of
questions, because
but I would love your perspective.
I was listening to me.
Oh.
Okay, Brittany, I would like to ask you a few questions because you mentioned about a boy. You both were talking about boys, but my point is there are a lot of girls out there. What is the perspective of parents when it comes to girls? Because we know that they are very good in masking. We know that they are very good in but it could say imitation. So they pick up social cues very well, and they can mask themselves in every kind of situation. So what about the girls? Because a lot of girls, when they get problem, when they get into high school or they are in the early teens actually, and the age is 20, then they get a lot of troubles and they don't even understand that what are you going to do about that, and they a lot of went into some form of self-injurious behavior and drug addiction and a lot of impulsive nature activities too. So what is the ratio of the girls, how much they are diagnosed, and what is the parent perspective toward the girl? Like, we know that a lot of girls are not having that kind of issue, that they are not non-verbal. Yes, they are verbal, and all the time if you look at toward their communication, that is what they are doing, what it is called, it's not coming in the mind exact term, but they're imitating what other people are doing, something like that, and it is a scripting actually, and
Scripting.
they are talking in scripting. Yes, that is the word, scripting. So these are the jingles, these are script, because whenever you go to somebody, say hi, how are you? If it's a death, sorry for your loss. If it's happiness, happy birthday, happy Valentine Day, or happy Thanksgiving, happy Christmas, and things like that. So these are some social cues, and those are social discussion toward that. So what is the perspective of mother towards female?
Love that you asked that question. I could talk to you on a whole other podcast just about that, honestly, because it's an issue. It's a thing. So I guess my first thought would be, I'm not 100% on the ratio, so I don't want to give you a statistic that's incorrect, but in my experience, in my personal life and as an advocate and as a teacher, the girls fall through the cracks a lot because they are great chameleons a lot of times. They are observers, which is a wonderful life skill. They adapt and they cope, and they get described sometimes as quirky, independent, things like that. And I notice that even sometimes family members will not necessarily attribute autism to what's going on for their child. And when a school approaches them and says, hey, I think your kid's autistic, they're like, no, that can't be it. Or sometimes the parent will go to the school and say, hey, my daughter's autistic and she needs an IEP. And the school will say, well, we're not seeing that here. So legally, we don't have to address it. And it's maddening, to be honest with you. On a personal level, my daughter has childhood apraxia of speech. And we went to a neurodevelopmental ped a couple years ago, and we did the whole workup, and he said that he thought her apraxia made the communication piece difficult, but he described, I don't know if this is right or wrong, but he described autism as a pie. He referred to it as a pie. If you have the filling and you have the crust, then it's a pie. If you don't have the filling and you don't have the crust and you only have one, then it's no longer a pie. It's an entirely different dessert and food. And he said, your daughter has some of the filling, but she doesn't have the crust. And I wonder all the time as she grows, and I am constantly on top of this as a parent, if she does have the crust, but she's a girl and she copes. So it's not even just the school. It's also from a neurodevelopmental point. If a child can cope and they're doing these things, then it can't be autism. If they're social, I hear this one a lot. Well, they said that the girl was social, so it's not autism. Things like that.
Yeah.
It's a problem, and not just in school.
And
I think
let me
that-
tell you something. I just read it at some place, and they said, and it hurt. It did not hurt me, but it hit me so hard that the criteria that we have for autism in our books, either it's ICD, either it's DSM, it's for the boys. So it is gender biased criteria, and I think that is something we need to address, because either if we talk about ADHD is different. If we talk about AUDHD, few people are familiar with that. And we don't even understand this point that what is ADHD, what is autism? What is the difference between them? Both feel very different. But sometimes girl might be, okay, why she's inattentive? Why she might be aggressive? She's inattentive. She is not exactly the way a boy with ADHD will be. And all the challenges are different for the girls, and the challenges are different for the boy too, even for the parenting lifestyle, because we talk about a lot of things that include sexual education, that include dangerous safety, that include stranger touch and things like that. A lot of time girls cannot say no,
Yeah.
and they get into a lot of troubles. We know this, and we don't talk about this. Nobody talk about that, and they are the prime suspect of any kind of abuse. Like they don't understand that the person that who is coming toward us, he is toxic or not, and that could cause them life too, and that could cause them getting into drugs and other kind of illicit things too. So I think we need to talk about that things as much as we can, and people are not talking about, let me tell you something. I think you asked to speak, but I will say something. Like, we are doing this discussion, you're talking about IEP, cricket also talking about IEP. You just put something and people would say that this puzzle piece is very aggressive, we don't like that. And I said to them, do you understand that it's not about puzzle piece? For me, if somebody would ask me what is the thing that represent autism, I would say there is a blue heart. You don't need to go into symbols. Okay, some kind of specific therapy, it is abusive for somebody, but you are talking about these things. You're talking about that organization is doing this and that organization is doing. Somebody is talking about the real problems. What are the real problems? What are the problems for the girls? What are the problems for the parents? And how a mother need to, is she going to give medication to her daughter for the monthly cycle, or she's going to do about that? So nobody is talking about that. And you would see a lot of activists, so-called activists, they're not even talking about those problems. They are just hate speech, and there's too much hate speech going on, I would say that. And the speech is, you will find that hate speech from the person who is autistic himself too, or herself too. You're not going to get dragged from somebody from the non-autistic or neurotypical world. That is a point, actually. So something is, you need to think about that.
Well, no, I think it's good. And Brittany, you know, I don't know with your studies, because you've gone through this, especially at the master's level, is there information given to you during your education cycle through the master's program, where they're talking and discussing about the difference between the female and the male when it comes to writing IEPs, or just identifying, the person and the way the brain works and all of those kind of things, because we are all different. I mean, there is a difference, but between female and male, they say that female are less diagnosed than male, like it's 60, they say 60 to 40, or 70 to 30. But the reality is it may be equal. It's just that we don't see it or identify it in females as quickly as we do males, because as you said, they mask, or they don't have those behaviors. And many families will stop at ADHD. They get the diagnosis of ADHD, they don't keep going. And what you're doing, you said, I'm watching and I'm observing my child. And I highly recommend that, because I have a lot of families that apraxia was the first diagnosis, but it led into the exhibit of, autism.
Yeah. And apraxia is tricky because sometimes it is just apraxia and it does complicate the social side of things. So, and the communication. So it can be tricky to navigate, but I think that's why it's so important to know and be informed about the difference between boys and girls, especially in my scenario. If for the grad school question, I went to a really great program and we did talk about it, but not in depth in the way that more about this is because schools don't diagnose, right? So this is the standard of eligibility criteria for autism. And that comes from IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disability Act that I mentioned earlier. So in the US, that comes, those eligibility requirements come with stipulations, and they also come with criteria. So that is what we learned. And then we talked about the difference of boys and girls, and some clues, I guess, for lack of better words, that you can kind of pay attention to, but not necessarily on what to do next or how to do it, because I don't think that came from a place of malice, just it's a lag in what we know and what we can do, especially because you can have a medical diagnosis, but that doesn't mean you get an educational diagnosis. So they're different things, right? And that's a problem as well, because the eligibility in IDEA is more about the social component. And as we just talked about, girls don't always meet that.
So today, what I think is so funny, and this happens all the time, Brittany, just so you know, when we meet individuals that have a child and they have a personal connection to autism, we plan to have Spectrum Talks and Tips as a IEP. Let's talk about IEP. Let's do this. And we go in every direction because there's just so much to cover. But today, we did discuss a little bit. I think we definitely touched upon the fact that IEPs are very difficult, for families to hear sometimes. There's an emotion that comes along with it. Families sometimes feel like they're not being heard, or teachers or educators may not feel like they're being heard. There's some conflict sometimes because there's things going on at home that families don't realize aren't happening at school, or things that are happening at school, and so there's just so many different components, and sometimes it becomes very overwhelming. And especially when the IEP, you might have 30 minutes, you got to get through all of these things, or an hour, you have to get through all of these conversations, and there's so much that needs to be addressed. So I would love to invite you back, Brittany, if you would be willing to meet with Dr. Khan and myself. I think that these discussions are very helpful for families to hear. One, because they know they're not alone. And the second part is because there's just so much, like when you sit down and you start diagnosing or dissecting, not even diagnosing, dissecting all of the things that go along with raising a child. And you've been doing it, watching your nephew for 18 years now. Your daughter is going through it, and there's some things that are happening. Our son's 20, almost 21. when you start looking back and you look at the IEPs, I kept every IEP Landon had because I wanted to see the development. I wanted to see the words that were used. And if you look back when he was like 2 and 3 going through this and now today, I would love to compare what's being said today versus what was being said back then and how they use those words, because we've evolved. Hopefully we've evolved right through that. And
Hopefully.
the things that, yeah, and the things that work, I mean, obviously they're going to stay in those IEPs because they're working. So to be able to use that information, we do need research, Dr. Khan. We need research on the difference between male and female. We probably need to find a psychologist out there that is focused specifically on female so that we can understand the differences and really address that. Because there's so many things that I think are missing in that part of, the diagnosis with the female. But going through all of this, we are definitely going to come back and we're going to talk a little bit more about IEPs. We definitely need to address that. But I would also like to talk about the other milestones, talk a little bit about what your sister's child went through and some of the hurdles and obstacles that they had, but also some of the fun things that are happening too. We push our individuals to a level of creativity, and we use the Bloom taxonomy hierarchy for that. And we want to get those individuals to the point where we've removed all the hurdles and obstacles of these individuals to be able to show their true abilities. Because once we're able to do that, you're going to see that you're dealing with the Einsteins of the world. You're dealing with the composers that are out there, the Bachs and the Chopins that did things way back in the day when they didn't diagnose or they didn't really talk about it. And these are the inventors of the world. These individuals have the ability to see things that we have never seen, or a journey that we've never experienced. But sometimes that's missed along the path because of all the other things that come along with it. And if we can get our families and our educators and our community and our responders to kind of come together and start really realizing this, and we can address some of these things, I believe that our future with the individuals living on the autism spectrum especially, you will see a whole different level of individuals, very eclectic, very intuitive. I mean, they're just the things that people say they can't do, they can do. We just have to find the ability for that, and remove some of those hurdles that they have to overcome. So I appreciate both of you guys being on here today and having this discussion, because I think it's a great beginning to set the platform for what we have to come. And we'll definitely figure out a day that we can come back and do this again. Any last words or anything you'd like to add, Brittany or Dr. Khan?
I think I came here to give you guys some tips and tricks, and I don't think I listed any of them, but I really, I really appreciate the conversation, because I think, like you said, it lets people know they're not alone, that their experience is not singular. I think that Dr. Khan, you make so many wonderful points, and I wish we could talk all day, because I want to circle back to some of the things that you said, because they are so important. And I really love the idea of you guys bringing on a psychologist specific to girls, because it's so needed.
So Brittany,
So I would like to join
yes.
both of you. There are a lot of things that we need to discuss, because whenever I'm talking to people, I am missing a lot of elements that they are not discussed yet, because they are talking about those things that everybody's talking about. For example, they would talk about meltdown. Everybody's talking about meltdown. They will talk about mood. Everybody's talking about mood. But what are the real problems? What are the everyday struggle everybody's facing? Nobody's talking about that. And we need to talk about that. What are the struggle a mother face who have a child with autism, who have a child with ADHD, and she's having some kind of domestic violence at home, and their parent too, and how she have to keep everything going, and she might have adopted some kind of traits from the child too, because she have to cope with the child, and she have to act like the way child is acting. So you're very much right that whenever we start talking about different things, we always feel the need that we have to restart these discussions again, because we all know and we all understand and we all want to give so much to this community, and still we sometimes we might feel like we have very little time for doing those discussions. But I think I'm so happy that I'm glad that you came today, and I will wish that we came again and we'll do something wonderful things together, because when I am coming to those forums, and whenever I'm discussing with the parents and with the professionals. I always feel that as country in Pakistan, we are very way behind those things. Like there are things, but people are not discussing about those things. There is not even concept of IEP. There is no concept of government supporting these kind of things. There is no concept that if the child is 18 years old, then he might get some kind of funding. And there's a lot of things we need to discuss. There is no concept that they have to consult this person. No neuropsychiatrist is consulted for epilepsy. And there's a lot of things we need to do. And I think that is the best way to give the awareness is to talk to about these things as much as we can. So uh, I think it's again that the time would come and our topic and our discussion will never end. So that was a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much to both of you, and see you in the next session. Thank you so much, Brittany.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
Linda.
much. Thank
Thank
you.